Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our online forum entitled Language Issues Amidst a Global Health Crisis, Insights and Experiences on the Ground. We are live streaming on Facebook and YouTube. So thank you very much for all of you who are tuned in today. And we are very excited and very grateful to our guests this afternoon, or in the case of our friends from overseas, early morning on a Saturday. So we have for this afternoon Vic Nierva, Christina Gallego, Mandana Seyfedinipur, and Pier Paolo Di Carlo. For our first speaker, we have invited Vic Nierva of Magbikol Kita. So Magbikol Kita is a language advocacy and idea hub, promoting the use of Bicol Central and the generation of materials in their language. So just a few reminders for everyone who is tuned in with us this afternoon. You may leave comments, questions, or feedback in the Facebook live stream, or you can also do that on YouTube if you are tuned in on YouTube. So, Vic, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Vinci. So, friends, good afternoon, especially to all the all those who are watching this afternoon. No? Dios mabalos, my utmost gratitude to the Department of Linguistics of the University of the Philippines, Diliman, for this opportunity to share. This afternoon, I am tasked to talk about our experience in our advocacies in furthering truths and information in my own language, that is Bicol. This is quite timely and thus demands our scrutiny because truly language plays a central role during these times of uncertainty, danger, hardship, and the need for security, especially as we continue to confront the COVID-19 pandemic. Um, my case in point here this afternoon is my being a writer and as an advocate of the Bicol language through my social media page and website, Magbicol Kita. For those who are not yet aware of Magbicol Kita, you may check on it. You may check it on Facebook and visit our website, www.magbicolkita.com. What is and why Magbicol Kita? Magbicol Kita roughly translate into English as let's talk Bicol. Though because here in the Philippines we use nouns, even proper nouns as verbs, once an affix is attached to it, Bicolizing in the case of Magbicol Kita is more than speaking our language. I'd say its translation may be better as let's be Bicol. I shall introduce to you this advocacy in three parts, and this introduction won't just be a campaign to promote Magbicol Kita, but rather a sharing of a sense of clarity about the essence and place of language in the daily lives and going about of a community, a region, a culture, and a nation. And after all the introduction will come a challenge. In the multilingual setting of the Philippines, let us collectively do the same. It was in the last part of I got involved along with public school teachers and some writers in the preparation of textbooks for the Mother Tongue-Based Multilingual Education or MTBMLE program of the Department of Education. As an editor and language evaluator, it's been my job to be with and assist teachers who are contextualizing the content of books intended for the school children in Bicol. I got into this endeavor after discovering a serious problem. The textbooks in our public schools are ridden with errors, both in content and in language. I found this I found this out one evening when my second grade niece asked for my help for her homework, but complaining wasn't enough. Help was needed. I knew I could help, so I did. There began my participation in the revising of the content and sharpening of the language for the use of our public school children from kinder to grade 3. What have we found out so far? First is that in the experience of the Bicol region, whether we have been aware or not, initial implementation of the MTBMLE was difficult due to lack or even absence of formal resources on Bicol grammar. How could we discuss verbs, adjectives, nouns, and the various aspects of language studies in our own tongue? How are we going to spell our words? How are we going to get past the challenges of multilingual setup in the region? There were many questions that we continue to seek answer for until now, which I think will still need a little more time before things get clearer. There were complications, and some of these complications were solved by sheer collective discussions and consultations with very few reliable references. Out of these came out the current Teacher's Resource Guide, or teacher TRG, for the MTBMLE program. These complications also called for the inclusion of new competencies that Bicol language demands. A clear example would be diacritical marks. Diacritical marks should be taught in the primary level. How should we spell pano or full and paano or y? Because in Bicol we have lots of words with similar spellings but with different stresses and even stops. So this is where Magbicol Kita entered. Despite the teacher's guide, a demo for the guide was needed. Ayan. So it was December 2018 when I started Magbicol Kita Facebook page. Its original purpose was simple: to make a demo of everything that's in the teacher's resource guide for the use primarily of teachers. On its first year, Magbicol Kita was a weekly showing of short video demos of the content of the resource guide. The feedback were great, especially from the teachers. Those were enough inspiration to continue. In between episodes, we posted social media cards on forgotten Bicol words, variations of words in the different language groups of Bicol, new coinages, and more. To date, we were able to air via Facebook and on YouTube 41 episodes and few more video materials that realized that advocacy. At first, we took videos using our mobile phones until such time when Magbicol Kita needed better devices for better quality outputs. Magbicol Kita, as a language instructional program, continued till the first quarter of 2020 when COVID-19 arrived. So, enhanced community quarantine was implemented in the country on March 15, 2020. At the onset, and even until now, COVID-19 pandemic brought us confusions, difficulties, personal and social breakdowns, and many more. Collectively, what are we going to do as a people? What are these dangers that we are confronting? How are we going to get through these challenges? Again, questions. Questions at the basic and essential level. Questions that were made more complex by the utter lack of concrete plans from the national government and were made more tortuous by the proliferation of false information. It was at this juncture where I saw the importance and necessity for translation. From March 15 till start of April, at the height of the lockdown, almost all government advisories and announcements were in English. If they were in Filipino, they were obviously translations from the original English done haphazardly. In an archipelagic nation of a multitude of languages, the simplest effort to translate has great impact as far as dissemination of important and needed information is concerned. As we confront the dangers of COVID-19, it is not just vaccines or medicines that we need. Essential and needed too are communication, information, and language. In a pandemic, there is no room for misinterpretation. one cannot be unsure. There is need for exactness. Here, language, any vernacular, plays a life-sustaining and life-saving role. Here is a practical and even a stronger rationale for DepEd's MTB MLE program. So it became our daily routine in Magbicol Kita to translate, design, and post social media cards with contents taken from reliable and legitimate local, national, and international institutions and organizations. The Department of Health, WHO, UNICEF, and even the National Task Force set up by the Philippine government. Information and content must come from them. They are the authorities. That is a fact, even when we have complained a lot about them. This is one way to combat fake news. It is quite interesting that our social media post that got the most attention wasn't about the virus or the illness that it brings. It's about the Social Amelioration Program, or SAP. What does this mean? It means that the government failed in the communication aspect, among others, of the social service program. On the days that followed the posting of the information about SAP, we got lots of inquiries about it as if we were a government agency. Where to go, what to bring, who to consult, when. Our our question then was, what happened to the state agency tasked to facilitate the program? Despite all these, and quite unknowingly, the efforts of Magbicol Kita, we were told much later, were bearing fruits of inspiration. Somehow, elsewhere, there were initiatives that followed our footsteps. One of these is the Fight COVID Volunteers, a network of hundreds of volunteers, actually thousands of volunteer translators and designers from different regions of the country. They were not professional translators, but they had the heart to help and translate. Perhaps they too saw and felt the quintessential place of language as a weapon against COVID-19. This could have been where the Komisyon sa Wikang Filipino, or KWF, should have done its job by providing editors so that translation efforts across the country in various languages could have been done with a more unified vision. After all, I believe that multilingual setup can be turned around and be made into a venue and opportunity for national unity. What have we learned so far in these efforts on language in the midst of the pandemic? A lot. There are a lot of learnings. Let me compress them into 4 points. First is the aspect of science. How are we going to articulate scientific terms in Bicol? For example, quarantine, R naught, contact tracing, recovery, morbidity, etc. How are we going to strike a balance between accuracy of translation and accessibility on the part of the receiving audience? Some of these questions still remain unanswered and are in need of longer process and cooperation among stakeholders. After all, Magbicol Kita is simply run by very few. There are only 4 of us in Magbicol Kita, and we also need some insights from external contributors. Secondly, there is also the need to coin and create new words so that we can articulate better in our vernacular new materials and experiences. For example, mental health. How are we going to say it in Bicol? Is baskog isip, the term which we created for it in Magbicol Kita, accurate enough? Still, there are many terminologies that even in their original source language are also quite new. Thirdly, there is a need to exert more effort to make way for more equal treatment and representations of the various components of languages of Bicol. I will admit that Magbicol Kita now is dominantly Bicol Central. This remains a challenge to the advocacy to broaden its reach, to cover other languages, other Bicol languages, and enrich the advocacy all the more. Bicol is not a singular language. It is comprised of many tongues. And fourth, the social media platform is not enough. We made it sure that all COVID-19 related campaign materials reach beyond Facebook. These materials were eventually picked up by local government units who had them printed and disseminated in villages. Eventually, people got to talk about them. Advisories were discussed among locals, far beyond the limits of the digital world. Here enters my third and last point. In the middle of June, while still engaged in the translation of COVID-19 materials and out of the learnings culled from this effort, a new realization came. Grammar and orthography instructions are not enough. Translations will still prove wanting. And even if Magbikol Kita also featured literary readings of literary works, there is something that's still missing. In general sense, in the life of Bicolanos, this third aspect of Bicol Kita remains contained within academes. And therefore, we need to let it out and place it in public spaces. This is ideation. And this is the reason why Magbicol Kita needed to have an additional platform from social media to www.magbicolkita.com. I am confident that Magbicol Kita website, which to date is the only all Bicol website in the world, is a hub of informed ideas written by carefully picked writers representing various disciplines. We have a diplomat, a lawyer, a farmer, teacher, philosopher, priest, filmmaker, anthropologist. We have a chef and more. So to sum it up, first, language and grammar. Second, translations. And third, ideation. In the mainstream media and the internet, ideation is almost always confined to English. Yes, Filipino too, but less frequent, almost none in Bicol. After all the translations done in the midst of COVID-19, I've realized that we need to ideate in our own language, to further discover ourselves, to talk about Bicol identity, to articulate Bicol world view. Among the current writers in Magbicol Kita are the young economist Christian D, for example, writes about finance and money matters in Miraya, the language of his hometown, Ginobatan Albay. Young historian Jai Ruheria writes on history and historiography in Bicol Central. And we have Bartop Nacher Dayanme Azores explaining laws and the justice system in her Legazpi Albay Bicol dialect. Magbicol Kita's rule of thumb now is accessibility and cross-platform. Make those elements, make those themes and topics that were usually confined in schools understandable to anyone, anywhere, whether online or offline. It is great, but not enough to just talk about our own language. We need to talk and discuss about the world using this language. This is the challenge for us now. The COVID-19 that we confront now is global. It is felt worldwide. Until now, we are still searching for a vaccine. For those who got infected, we are still looking for drugs that expedite cure. Medical researches are being done in various countries, in various languages. These efforts are made possible through ideation done in languages that are intimate to those who are doing it, ideations that make way for thoughts and concepts articulated close to the hearts of the people. Again and again, I've kept on reiterating that the commitment of Magbicol Kita does not simply dwell on language. We are committed all the more to the people, the speakers of this language. In the last few days, I've come across a report that Bicol is among those Filipino languages in danger of perishing. I haven't seen that data yet, but I have a strong feeling that it's not yet the case. But we have to do more. I have we have to use our language in our search for truths, in our aspirations for healing, in our quest for better quality of life, and in turn we enrich, broaden, deepen, strengthen our language. Friends, this is Magbicol Kita. This is how we experience language in the pandemic. Thank you very much and good afternoon.
Thank you so much, Vic. And really, your presentation was able to highlight how important the aspect of languages in overall community life, and not just issues and concerns relating to COVID-19. Although you certainly stepped up to the challenge when we experienced this collective problem, this collective issue of the pandemic. And as we are flashing below in the screen, you can check their websites and their website and their social media platforms and see the sheer volume of output that they have generated. Their team of four, grabe. It's really thank you, Vic, for those
Thank you. Thank you.
insights and what you were able to present this afternoon. So I was wondering if we have some feedback from the other members of the panel, or from our viewers. If you have any questions or comments for Vic and their team in Magbikol Kita.
Maybe just say a few words, but I'll mention Vic's work in my presentation too. But I just like to commend Vic and the entire team of Magbikol Kita because they really were like tirelessly producing these materials in Bicol, and it's very impressive to see the sheer amount of materials they've produced during the lockdown. It's very impressive.
Thank you very much. Honestly, most of the materials were actually our way of coping the struggles of the lockdown. Sometimes
Right.
it's really difficult, and translations and all these endeavors that Magbikol Kita took on. Uh, they were helping people. They were helping in information dissemination, but also, it's kind of therapeutic also. That's why I was always telling people, you can help in any way you can. Um, we were all struggling after all.
Yeah, and all I have are high hopes for your endeavor and your advocacy, because I would also like to commend your what you mentioned about incorporating other Biko languages into the content that you're
Yes,
generating, because one of the most diverse spots in Central Philippines is in Bicol.
yes. It's also a point of criticism for Magbikol Kita because when we say Magbikol Kita, it kind of claims that it covers everything, every possible language in Bicol. I think that's why in the ideation part of Magbikol Kita, that's really the aspiration. We, as much as possible, we get columnists from the various provinces, the various language groups. It's a little difficult to edit because, for example, Christian D's Miraya, I really don't understand many
Yeah.
of the words. We and Buhinon is not yet there, and Masbate is not yet there. Katanduan is in a complex arena. So that's the aspiration. I think along the way, I think we can achieve it, but we just take one step at a time. Yeah.
Yeah, so shout out to all the Bicolanos who are tuning in, especially those who are using the other Bicol languages like Miraya,
Yes.
Rinconada, Buitnan, and thank you for tuning into our live stream. There, we're actually flashing their comments and their feedback. Okay, so we actually have a question from Joriza Novio. What could be the future strategies of the team to gather more people that could help address not only Central Bicol but also the other Biko languages. Yes, to the last point that you brought up.
Yeah.
What's in store, I guess, for Magbikol
Yeah.
Kita?
Uh, it's an opportune time now that Bicol literature is also growing. It's expanding. Uh, for example, Catanduanes is very active now in publishing books, books
Mm,
of stories, books of essays, and we are getting in touch with writers. We're getting in touch with possible editors. We're getting in touch with people who may be able to help in these advocacies. I've always been telling those who are helping Magbicol Kita that if we really want things get done, just make our voice louder. People will help. I think, especially, I think that's a general learning out of this pandemic experience. Um, you just shout it out. Tapos people come, people respond, and help is there. For example, now Bagbicol Kita is doing a little donation drive for teachers who are having difficulty printing the modules in
right.
their respective schools, especially in the remote
For
areas.
remote
Um,
learning.
yeah, for remote learning. Uh, I think we have gathered much. We were now we so far we have around 80 reams of A4 bond paper, mga ganyan, and more and more. But the thing is, it's the responsibility is also becoming more and more, becoming heavier and heavier also. No, so it's not only in the realm of language, but culture, literature,
Right.
even humanitarian. No, so nandun na lahat. Pero sige lang, sige lang.
Sige lang. Oo.
Uh,
Holistic ang proyekto natin sa Magbikol Kita. From Dominic Nobleza, how can the public contribute to Magbikol Kita in terms of monetary contributions? These are really concerns that are important to discuss for advocacy such as yours.
yeah. When I invited potential columnists for magbicolkita.com, the first thing that I told them is that we still don't have any money to pay them, to compensate writing weekly or once a month. But they heeded the call. No, the issue now is sustainability. If we are having a
Right.
website, for example, sustainability is an issue. I think we are contemplating on accepting advertising for the website just for the site to be sustainable, no, to to be able to be there all the time, no. Saka nakakahiya din sa mga writers. I'm a writer, and writers' welfare is also a concern for Magbicol Kita. So soon, uh, I'll talk to Dom. I'll talk to the one who asked the question. Let's talk after this, maybe. But yes, the monetary aspect of Magbicol Kita has not yet been thought about, but it's there in the long term plan.
Yes.
There's
So
another
for
question. No?
yes, from Kevin Cordovis regarding other representatives from other Bicol languages.
Yes, I think
Yes.
we have answered that earlier.
Yeah.
Magbicol Kita is really an advocacy. So the if I want to articulate it now, that if you think you can help, please reach out to us, because we are a very small team. If when I started Magbicol Kita, it's just out of my own volition, my own consciousness. I think I have a gift. I think I have something to contribute. So uh, I volunteered myself, parang adelantado, no? So if for those who are watching now, for those who are attending this lecture, this forum, if you think you can help in the content management of Magbicol Kita, especially if you are from uh, outside the realm of Bicol Central, because that's really my turf. Or even if I also speak Rinconada, uh, the other Bicol languages, I'm really having difficulty maintaining and responding to needs of the other Bicol languages.
Yes, so definitely more work to do as we
Yes.
as is our lives here in this kind of work, and more power to Bicol Kita and Sir Vic and the team. So more viewers are coming in from different parts of the Philippines. I think I saw someone tuning in from Isabela, from here in Metro Manila, Abra, Rizal, from the different parts of Bicol. Thank you so much for finding time this Saturday, uh, finding time on a Saturday to join us here. Okay, so yeah, let me introduce our next speaker. Christina Gallego is a PhD candidate at the School of Culture, History, and Language, College of Asia and the Pacific at the Australian National University, and she is also an assistant professor at the UP Department of Linguistics. So, Christina, thank you so much.
All right, I'll start sharing my screen. This is good. First, thank you very much to the Department of Linguistics. Although I am also from the UP Department of Linguistics. It's really good that we are able to share our work at Language Warriors PH here in this forum. So let me start by talking briefly about the linguistic landscape of the Philippines, just to set the context of Language Warriors PH. So as you can see here in my presentation, this is a world map, a distorted world map of where the size of each country is actually proportional to the number of indigenous languages spoken in the country. So as you can see, the Philippines, with about 186 languages according to Ethnologue, is one of the most linguistically diverse countries in the world. So as you can see, the size of the Philippines, it's quite massive here. It has a language diversity index of 0.842. So what does language diversity index mean? An index of 0 means that everyone speaks the same language, and an index of 1 means that no two people speak the same language. And so with this high linguistic diversity index of 0.842, it means that we really are a very diverse country in terms of its languages. But many of the Philippine languages remain at risk. So again, according to Ethnologue, the Philippines has 186 languages. And among those languages, 177 are indigenous. But 43 of them are either endangered or extinct. So this is a map of the endangered languages of the Philippines. This is actually a good reference as it serves as a guide to identify which languages are candidates for revitalization, for full documentation, and actually which ones are in the most need for immediate intervention in some form of salvage documentation. But actually, documentation and revitalization efforts are merely palliative measures because they do not directly address the multi-causal factors that lead to the rapid decline of marginalized indigenous languages of the country. So, for example, one of the manifestations of this ongoing marginalization of indigenous languages and communities in the Philippines is that they are often overlooked or missed out, as in matters of national importance, such as this ongoing pandemic. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have observed that public health information is only typically relayed in either English or Filipino. And many of the communities in the Philippines may not be proficient enough in either of the two languages. But in terms of official materials and resources, the local government units do sometimes provide materials in the major languages. But again, these smaller languages are often left out. So the communities where these smaller languages are spoken are actually the most vulnerable to the pandemic, since they don't have access to basic medical facilities. So they can't even imagine how they will be treating COVID cases in these areas. They don't have direct access to news and the internet, and they lack institutional support in all directions. So making sure that important information reaches these communities is imperative, and this is a basic human right. So part of the goals of Language Warriors PH is to demand for stronger state support for the indigenous languages and communities of the Philippines. And this includes ensuring equitable access to important information in the languages Filipinos use and understand. So Language Warriors PH is an initiative of the UP Department of Linguistics. Just a brief background, we felt that we needed to come up with something that would contribute to the efforts to address the COVID-19 pandemic. And we saw the rise in the number of community-based translations of Department of Health or World Health Organization information or infographics about COVID-19. And these efforts actually highlight the role of language in this global health crisis. One thing to emphasize is that this isn't just happening in the Philippines. We can see this elsewhere. So a lot of language activists and enthusiasts have begun translating COVID-19 information in the different languages all over the world. So, so we did not want to saturate and reduplicate what the communities are already doing. So we came up with this meta translation project. That is Language Warriors PH. And part of the efforts of our group is to collect the translated materials in a repository for easier access and dissemination. So Language Warriors PH is also a platform for these community translators to connect. So through our Facebook group, we continue to share materials, resources, and outputs and connect the translators to particular projects or initiatives. So I'll just show you briefly what the Facebook group looks like. So while it's loading, the members of the group come from different linguistic backgrounds and include academics, professional and volunteer translators, students, language activists, and actually even medical professionals who are all working together to produce and disseminate COVID-19 information. So as you can see, as of today, we have 562 members. And in the group, you see people posting about events like this event today and other events they might be interested in, as well as posting about translation projects which members can volunteer to participate in. All right. So just going back. And ultimately, we want to use the insights from the project to draft policy recommendations that emphasize the importance of relying important information in the different languages the Filipinos use and understand. And this is something that needs to be brought to the forefront of the discussion. That is, we need to ensure timely, equitable, and inclusive access to information, not just in the centers, but everywhere in the country. So this is also not just applicable in times of global health crisis and natural calamities or disasters, but more generally in issues of national relevance. So as mentioned, one of the projects within Language Warriors PH is the collection of materials relating to COVID-19. So far, we have collected materials in 70 languages and dialects. And as of May 2020, there are a total of 927 materials in the repository. And these materials are classified under various domains, most commonly physical health, but also other areas such as mental health, socioeconomic support, and miscellaneous information. So I'll show you what the repository looks like. So you can access the repository. It's simply a Google drive at the moment. So as you can see here, there are several folders in the repository classified according to the different languages. So if we want to look at Akianon, you'll see here the different materials we've collected, translated into Akianon. But just looking at the folder or the files in the folder, it can be quite confusing to navigate because you don't have information for about the specific files. And so we've created a metadata. If you go to the bottom of the page here, you can see there's a metadata which you can download, and it will give you information about the files in the repository. So the first sheet in the metadata contains an index of languages and a brief description, a brief explanation of the information detailed in the metadata. So if you want to explore what the files in Akianon are, so you can just click Akianon and see the information about the files. So for here you can see ID. So the ID here corresponds to the file in the repository. So the file named Ginhawa Akianon _01 refers to the file in the folder. And here you can see language. You can see here the material, so the title of the material and a brief description of the material. So some ways to prevent the spread of COVID-19 and the domain where the material is classified into. So physical health, but it's physical health is only one of the many domains we've identified for the repository. Some you can have miscellaneous information here. So an example would be what to do if one meets the conditions of being a close contact, etc. And also we have mental health materials. Another information we've included in the metadata is medium, so either print or video. In the type of material, is it a translation or is it an original work? Now, regarding the translators, we've made the distinction between the proponent and the translator, because sometimes, in some cases, there are translation initiatives headed by one proponent. For example, this one, headed by Soleil Vinoya, who is our alumna. I will talk about her work a little bit later. But then there can be a different translator, so a specific speaker of a particular language, for example. We've also tried to categorize the proponent and the translator. So just identifying, are they volunteer individuals or are they part of an organization or a volunteer group? And if they are volunteer translators or professional translators, meaning professional, meaning they have particular training in translation work or they practice translation as their occupation. So that's it for the metadata. I encourage you to explore the repository just to see what we have so far. All right. Now, just a brief disclaimer about the repository. It is, we don't claim it to be exhaustive because we only work with the networks we know, and we only limited our search on Facebook since it's something that's very popular in the Philippines. So a lot of materials have been disseminated through Facebook. And so the figures I am showing here may not accurately reflect the overall translation efforts in the country. And the repository and reports actually only cover a specific period of time. So from the start of the lockdown in March up to the 22nd of May. I'll talk more about this later. But just to sum up, I won't detail the information here, but just to sum up, the translation efforts and initiatives we've seen in Language Warriors PH are actually grassroots efforts, so produced by the community or the local communities. And this clearly shows that the local communities are very much aware of the need to provide important information about the pandemic in the languages the people understand. And this highlights the role of community translators, the role they have played in these extraordinary times. They can actually be considered essential support for the community to prevent the spread of COVID-19. But it needs to go beyond that. As Vic has said earlier, the state needs to do something. We need to demand stronger state support to address the needs of the local communities. Now, in terms of the languages with the most number of translated materials, here we can see that the top languages are the major languages of the country. But in the repository, we also have some smaller languages of the Philippines. And actually, most of these smaller languages are part of Soleil Vinoya's project, which I will show in a bit. Again, the usual disclaimers I've mentioned just now apply. Now, just to give you a different perspective on the materials we've collected in the repository as of May 2020, this is a mapping of the translation efforts, and we've produced this in collaboration with the UP Department of Geography. So I'd just like to give a special thanks to Dr. Vanessa Joy Anacta, who is the cartographer for this map. Here you can see that the materials are mapped according to the provinces in the country. Just to emphasize that different languages can be located in different provinces. So here you can see, for example, the darker the color, the more the number of materials produced. So in the Bicol region, as we've seen in Vic's presentation, the Bicol region has many big Bicol languages. It's not just Bicol Central. So it can have like a bunch of other materials produced in many other Bicol languages. And the same goes for the different areas in the Philippines. Another thing to note is that there are also languages with no locational feature. For example, Filipino Sign Language. Now, regarding the challenges we've encountered in Language Warriors PH. First, about the collection of materials for the repository, we admit that we may have missed a bunch of other materials that's been put out there because we only work on the networks we know. So the reports we share should not be taken as absolute representation of the collective translation efforts in the country. And we also had to stop the collection after the first 3 months of the quarantine because the work has been a bit difficult to sustain. We only relied on volunteers to help with the collection of materials. But also at the same time, we've noticed a significant slowing down of production of materials after the first months of the quarantine. But again, there are still a lot of materials we may not have caught up on. Also, it would be interesting to see how the materials have evolved from mostly translation projects to more creative ones. We've seen recently the rise in the number of like storybooks, coloring books about COVID-19, or even poetry, short stories. And this would also be interesting to explore. Now, in this bit of my presentation, I'll highlight some of the translation initiatives we've seen in Language Warriors PH. So we've already seen Vic Nierva's work in Magbicol Kita, but there is also one organization, the Surigao Non-Study Center, and they do amazing work in partnership with local organizations in communities in the Caraga region, especially in the dissemination of the materials they have produced and translated. One other translation initiative I'd like to highlight is Soleil Vinoya, who is our alumna, and she started one of the earliest translation projects. And her project includes smaller languages of the Philippines like Ibatan, of Babuyan Claro, Blaan, and also Southern Alta. And some of these languages are actually considered endangered languages of the Philippines. Also, other translation initiatives I'd like to feature is the Fight COVID-19 group, which we've seen in Vic's presentation as well. So they've partnered with White Widget to produce this app on COVID-19. I think this is a symptom tracker. So it's available in 17 languages and dialects. And the group is composed of volunteer translators, proofreaders, layout artists, and they are actually the biggest contributors of materials in the repository. Another group that's making an impressive effort in this time is the FSL Act for COVID-19. So news outlets rarely provide for Filipino Sign Language interpretations. And as a result, some members of the deaf community were not aware of the implementation of community quarantine procedures in the initial month of the quarantine. So there was a case where one person was arrested because he did not know that there's this quarantine that's happening, and we don't want to see this happen, but it does because of the lack of state-sponsored actions to include minority communities such as the Filipino deaf community. And so the group FSL for Act for COVID addresses this issue by providing Filipino Sign Language interpretations of news on broadcast television, which they share on their Facebook page. And another translation initiative is the UP College of Education. They produce COVID-19 resources for Filipino children. So this one here is a COVID-19 dictionary for Filipino children in Kapampangan. And for Language Warriors PH specifically, we've also received a bunch of translation requests. So here are three of the requests we've received. This is a children's story book, or picture book, or coloring book. It's actually very interesting because this is an initiative of high school students of the Philippine Science High School, Western Visayas campus. And members of the Language Warriors PH were actually very enthusiastic about this project. And so you can also check their website, just maybe search on Google this book, Kids Against COVID, and you can print and work on the materials. So two other translation requests are from Tugon Ateneo about sexual harassment and from PsychServe about mental health. And these latter two, while not directly relating to COVID-19, deal with important issues that have arisen during the lockdown. So the number of sexual harassment cases have gone up, and mental health issues are also on the rise. So rate of suicide cases have gone up during this lockdown. So this clearly shows that there is a need to go beyond the issue of physical health. Information on other issues arising from the quarantine needs to be disseminated to the local communities as well. So what is next for Language Warriors PH? We need to assess the impact of the group as well as the overall translation efforts in the country. So first, we'd like to know how Language Warriors PH has actually helped the translators. And I'd like to share this comment we received from one of our members. So it's nice to see that Language Warriors PH served as a space where the translators can talk to each other and feel that they are not alone in doing these translation endeavors. So it created this sense of community among the translators. And more importantly, we'd also like to assess the translation efforts we've seen so far. So I'll talk about production, dissemination, and access of the materials. In terms of production, the technical aspects of translation work. So how do we approach the translation of technical terms? For example, droplets, airborne, and as Vic has mentioned in his presentation as well. So these are technical terms, and what if so how do you find the equivalent of these terms in the languages? Also, if the translation initiative is a voluntary one, so volunteer translators may not have sufficient training in translation work. So how do we ensure the quality of these translations? This ultimately boils down to the goal of the translation project. So what is the goal of the translation project? What materials need to be translated or disseminated to the public? And this determines the approach we take in translation. So what needs to be produced in the local languages, what materials or information would be okay to be disseminated in the regional lingua francas, and this needs a deep understanding of the patterns of multilingualism of these communities. How are people using the different languages in their repertoire? Now, in terms of the actual materials produced, we have identified in our regular reports for Language Warriors PH that there is an apparent gap in the translation work. So we need more materials about socioeconomic support, like the social amelioration program, and other issues arising from the lockdown or the pandemic. Equally important issues like sexual harassment and mental health issues. Now, in terms of dissemination, how are the materials disseminated? And these are mostly disseminated through social media or the internet. But what about communities, the smaller communities, which do not have ready access to the internet? So how are these materials accessed by members of these communities? So pictured here is are two pictures from Vic Nerva, and they've Magbikol Kita printed the materials they've produced and disseminated these in key areas like rural health units. And this is a really important part of the translation initiative. It's not just production, but ensuring that these materials are disseminated to the communities. And lastly, in terms of access and engagement, so how actually did the people respond to these translation efforts? Were they happy? Were they more engaged with these posts if they are written in the local languages? And I've heard feedback that, of course, there's definitely higher engagement if the posts are in the local languages. So these next steps for Language Warriors PH will be done hopefully as the next phase of our project via focus group discussions and interviews with key translation initiatives. So our next steps for the project is so I'll be outlining it here. The pandemic has allowed us to establish networks with different groups, and this actually bridges the gap between academia and the local communities. We believe that the discourse needs to go beyond the towers, the ivory towers of academia. And Language Warriors PH hopefully maintains its space as a platform for collaboration. And we actually have upcoming collaborative projects lined up in the future. So we believe that no community should be left behind, particularly in times like this. And that being said, we continue to fight for inclusivity and equity. And I'd like to end my presentation with this statement we've drafted, hopefully as part of our policy recommendation. So Language Warriors PH believes that access to credible information in a language that one understands is a basic human right. This pandemic reveals the state's inability or perhaps indifference to provide this right to most of its citizens. And so we demand that government also speak the languages beyond the centers. Language should not hinder citizens from participating in government, and it should not hamper government's delivery of services. In a pandemic, ignorance is death, and disinformation, murder. So I'd like to thank the amazing volunteers for Language Warriors PH who tirelessly work and helped us in collecting the translated materials in the repository. So Manuel Tamayo, Soleil Vinoya, Joey Auxilian, Sander Alaya, Sheila Ayala, Sheila Tamparong, Glenn Huerto, and Yeda Piedad. And this is the faculty behind Language Warriors PH: Aldrin Lee, Jesus Federico Hernandez, myself, Mary Ann Gaitan Bacolod, Jeruca Chin Abrigo, Michael Manahan, Vincent Christopher Santiago, and LC Orr. So I'll just show you some of the links you might be interested to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Christina. And one thing that I'd like to appreciate and point out in your presentation is the importance of the inclusion of not just spoken languages, but also visual languages.
Yes.
You're right in saying that the FSL COVID-19 team has been amazing and tireless in their efforts for delivering information to deaf, with the capital D, Filipinos. So it's really it's not just about the spoken languages, not just about the mother tongues, but also the Filipino Sign Language.
Yes.
And
What's really
yes,
worrying about this case is that the Filipino deaf community are really often left out like in broadcast media, you rarely see FSL interpretations, and this is like a very basic thing that we need to provide for the Filipino deaf community.
Right, that's true. And I would just like to mention that we have viewers tuning in from Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Thailand. Welcome and thank you so much. And from other provinces of the Philippines like Lanao del Sur, Nueva Ecija, Dagupan up north, La Union, Baguio. Thank you so much. And I hope if you have any comments and if you have any feedback, please feel free to type them in. So another thing uh, that I picked up from the presentation is that it's true that um, language oppression is multi-causal, and
Yeah.
really it's really, I guess, multi-causal problems call for holistic solutions as well.
Yes. Yes.
It's not just a matter of translation; it goes
Yeah.
way beyond that. Mm,
Yes. So it's we need to address many different aspects beyond language in order to revitalize these endangered languages of the country.
yes. I wonder if Vic or Mandana or Pierre Paolo have anything to say about Christina's presentation. Vic, kita naman the the output of Magbikol kita in the chart.
Yeah, I have a question, and I'm mostly concerned or wondering about the repository, because one of the things we have learned from our experience with the Endangered Languages Archive in ILAR is that the ease of access, the
Yeah.
ease of using it is key for people to be able to find information. And
Yes.
so I'm wondering what your plans are, or what kind of support we can give you to turn your Google Drive into an easy accessible repository that is easier, where it's easier to find things.
Yes. So this is part of the projects we want to develop further for Language Warriors PH. Google Drive is just very temporary thing, and so the next step is the vision for this repository is to have like a website where people can access the materials in an easy way. So you have like filters if you want to search for a particular language about a particular topic. That's why we've tried to have the metadata as detailed as possible in order to have like these options in the website. But again, yes, we need technical support to develop this bit of our project.
I have a nice idea what you could do, where there is a very beautiful piece of software for community archiving, which is very simple, it's free, and we've helped to set up an archive in Thailand with that. That might lend itself really beautiful to this project. So I'll talk
And
more to you about this,
yes,
Christine.
sure. Another consideration for this website or platform is the language, the meta language you'll be using to access the materials. Like, okay, will it be still just be available in English or Filipino? And that defeats the purpose of these translations, right? So it's also something that we need to have a careful think.
All right. So from Elizabeth Carable Fetalvero, thank you very much for this input. It really boosted my morale to fast track our proposal for an extension program. So different proposals and initiatives stemming from the local communities and different institutions across the country. As a
Yes.
contribution for
I so say similar to what we received in the comment. I'd just like to give a shout out to the folks at Mindanao State University. They've also reached out to us about training for translation, because the students are actually very interested in doing translation work, especially for the COVID-19 pandemic. And MSU, the Mindanao State University, is a key institution because they have like access to the languages of Mindanao, even the smaller ones. So this is one of the collaborative projects we're currently developing.
All right. Vic, would you like to add anything, or Pier Paolo?
Yeah, I think one of the best things that Language Wires PH brought to the table is the venue for translators to have a hub. Because when you are translating in the middle of this, turmoil, the initial feeling is really being alone. So when Language PH came, well, Language Wires PH came, we discovered all of a sudden that there are of us. I think a good way to look at the possibility of having a network, really, if uh, if the state is having difficulty in coming up with a network, then we can actually on a voluntary basis. I think we can. I think we can. Yeah.
And we've already started this through Language
Yes.
Warriors PH, so it would be good to maintain this space.
Because I think there's also a need for sharing of resources.
Yes.
Soon we can have those repository not just for materials done, but other resources like trainings and other things.
Good morning, everyone. I'm sorry, I
Good
joined you too
morning.
late in order to be able to make any comments. But looks like this was a very, I mean, this is a nice project that may also, I mean, it sounds like very similar. I mean, at least in the principles with what we are trying to do with Mandana and others. And I'm really sorry. I missed most of it, and I don't know. Here it's 8 a.m. and on a Saturday morning. I'm sorry.
It's all right. Thanks for making it.
Anyway, I hope we'll be in touch later on.
Yeah,
that would be great.
That would be great. Okay. All right. At this point, I'd like to introduce our last pair of speakers. We have Mandana from SOAS University of London and Pier Paolo Di Carlo of University of Buffalo at SUNY. They're going to be talking about the Viral Languages website. And as was said a while ago, it's very similar to what we hope to achieve with Language Warriors PH and other translation initiatives across the world. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation. Pier Paolo and I are very excited about this opportunity to talk about our work here. I'm going to be starting the first part of the presentation, and then Pier Paolo is going to take over the second part, and he is also going to drive our PowerPoint presentation. So I'm going to ask him to turn it on, please.
Yeah, it's on. Vinci, can you?
Yeah, coming.
Yes, that's it. Thanks.
Beautiful. So let me first start to say it was amazing to listen to all these different efforts that are happening in the Philippines. And there were many points where I thought, yeah, that is also our motivation for why we started Viral Languages. And of course, we always start with a very provocative title, namely, Can Linguists Save Lives? Which has to do with the fact that this is the background where we're coming from. So, as you know, the COVID path started in the global north and went to the global south. And you can see in the next slide what the situation is. This is the pictures from May, and the darker the spot, the higher the numbers of COVID cases. For us, we are working in the realm of endangered languages, and So we linguists that are working in this realm are working in the spots that you see on this very map. So what you can see on this map is the languages that are endangered, meaning that children are not learning the languages anymore, and these languages will very likely fall silent within the next 100 200 years. And the darker the spots, the less speakers there are. And if a spot is black, it means that languages are already gone. And if you look at Australia or North America, you can see how terrible the situation is and what genocide has done to the indigenous people there. So the linguists I work in this realm go to these places and live with communities and document their languages, understanding and knowing their social, their environmental, and their day-to-day life situation. And of course, if you know what the situation is and how bad information flow in these marginalized communities is, then it was clear that this whole situation is going to be a disaster for the communities that the linguists work with. I will talk briefly about the endangerment situation. You can see what the situation globally is, and it's the same. So basically, we're zooming out from the Philippines into the global situation. Half of the world's population speak 25 languages. And we believe that there are around 7,000 languages in the world. And that means that the other half, 3.5 billion people, speak the other 6,900 something languages. And let me just say, we have not exact numbers about the number of languages. These are estimates. However, we think it's around 7,000. But that also means that there's a lot of languages that are very small, meaning they have very small number of speakers. And here you have a parallel distribution of speaker population. On the left-hand side, you can see the number of speakers, and on the right-hand side, the rank of the language. So basically what you see, there is, the upmost dot, there is a very few languages with huge amounts of speakers, and many, many languages with very small amounts of speakers. And that tells you something about marginalization and access to information and marginalized languages, right? We often talk about majorities and minorities, but I think the better way of talking about this is to talk about marginalization. So when COVID hit, we thought we need to do something about this, because we need to inform the people that we work with, and we need to help to make sure that the core message gets out. And what we know from our work on the ground, and Paolo will talk way more about this, is that the core messages is the idea was from from the big organizations like the WHO, is to get the core message out in the major language to reach as many people as fast as possible. And we know that not everyone can read, so we do infographics. And what we can see is we have a bias in terms of written bias, so language that as written, and in infographics. And we thought, okay, this is a huge problem in those terms. We know that there is a lot of grassroots information that we know that from March to May, there's like 500 different 9 languages where translations happen in grassroots information. And again, if you think about that there are 7,000 languages, 500 doesn't seem very much. So we thought something needs to happen. And now imagine, you're a speaker of one of these languages where nothing happens, where information doesn't get to you. And I'm very glad Christina mentioned sign languages. What happened in the Philippines is a massive problem all over the world. We also have this problem in the bigger countries. Imagine you suddenly have this information and these people come to you. What does make you trust the information that you get if you are hit with a pandemic? Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
So think about, you see these people in yellow coming into your places and into your houses, and then you get these kinds of things which say infographics, and there's some idea that infographics are some universal feature, and of course there is a colonial bias how things are expressed. Now look at this infographics. I just googled infographics and social distancing. If you look at this, what do these infographic means? Like, does it mean if you draw a circle around you, the virus is not going to get to you? If you look at that top one, or if you see the two people, sitting on a bench, does it mean that you have to turn away from each other? Or the guy who's sitting in front of a TV, just think about how many places there are where there are no TVs and couches, and where social distancing, where, it doesn't mean if you have an arrow between you, does that mean, it means distance? I mean, there's the whole global world. Not everyone is related into this. Also think about, how people look on these things, like the way they're dressed. And so it's not clear that these infographics reach people in, the global south, in, places in Africa or Papua New Guinea or in Asia. And of course, the written bias is another problem. And we know it's not only an issue that is hitting, really remote communities in terms of how does information get to them, and it has to be written. We have the same problem in Sweden. We do know, from reports that people with foreign backgrounds are disproportionately affected by the coronavirus. So this also means that, just translating something into another language is not enough, because, these people that live in Sweden probably, are literate and, can read and have access to computers and TV and whatnot, but still it's not reaching them. So what is happening here, and this is another basis for the work that we have been doing. So you can see here, for example, like this also happens in Britain. So it's not a first, second, third world country or global south, global north issue. It is not only about translating a message, it's also about how to get the message across. What reaches whom, to be able to trust that this message is right, and to be able to believe that this is what we need to do. We need to not keep distance from each other and stay indoors. And think about staying indoors. There's a lot of places where staying indoors means staying together in a very small hut, where it's much better to be outside and not being indoors. So how can we get the message across? It is not only important, that something is translated, but it's important to select the relevant information for the given context. And the context across the world is very different in different places. How does it need to be said? Like, how can we make a community accept, use the language that is accepted, but also use the accepted genre and register? So if, in the Western world, we believe everything that has, some numbers and some statistics, but statistics and numbers won't mean anything in many other places. The other part is, who needs to say it? Who is the accepted speaker or the messenger? In some places, it has to be the shaman or the healer, or it has to be the, doctor, or it has to be, the person on the TV that spreads the news. And the question is, where does it need to be said? So if we send stuff through the internet, it has to be used, and so people need to have access, and it has to be affordable. If we send, information over the internet, and you have to download it, and it's expensive, and then it's not going to help. So the channels to distribute is important. The person who gets the message across, which language is accepted for this information, because often, marginalized communities will not believe what is said in the majority in the oppressor language, because they have much reason not to trust it. So
Okay.
this is the baseline from which viral languages started. So this is the background in which we are operating with the Endangered Languages Documentation Program, and because we're operating on a global scale, we can see the situation differs across the continents, across the places. And then when it all happens, Pier Paolo got in touch and said, we need to do something. I have an idea. And now he's going to present how he translated his idea into viral languages.
Thank you, Mandana. So let's just simplify a little bit the complicated matters that lie behind the problem of translations in the context of risk communication. Let's distinguish two main models in this kind of translations. One is the message-centered. So the main focus is the message itself. So how to get the message across various languages. And this is basically what WHO does. The main points are that it's a verbatim translation of a standard text. And this is also for a reason of control of the text, so that the agency, that the entity is sure that the very same content is distributed, is delivered across multiple communities. And so it's context neutral, just because of the need of being so general. So here we wrote it has a limited effectiveness. This depends on the communities. In some communities, this may be quite effective. Basically, those who in the communities that where people really trust WHO, they will be quite content in just seeing the WHO logo somewhere to believe the message. But in fact, so many of these messages get confused with many others that populate our social media. So the main point that Mandana already recalled is that it's very fast. It can allow you to produce a number of messages in the matter of minutes. And this is, for instance, what you can do if you go to the translationcommons.org website, and they have a nice application where you have the 5. So this is the do the 5. So these are the 5 main actions that one should perform in order to minimize risk of infection and of diffusion of the virus. So wash your hands, cough in your elbow, don't touch your face, keep distance, and stay home. And you can automatically translate this into, I guess now, 140 languages. And you can contribute to more languages. So you can contribute with your own. Here, I would just like to let you see that there is one of the examples. So these are just the infographics that Mandana was talking about. Maybe I don't know, Mandana, if you want to comment on this, but I'm quite puzzled about the "Don't touch your face" infographics. It looks like there is a hand of there's someone else's hand.
Yes.
So you don't have, which is also good. So you don't have someone else put their hands on your face. And then also the 2 meters. Well, not everyone, as we will see, is necessarily clear on how much distance equates to 2 meters. Anyway, so, and this is the translation into Torwali, which is a language spoken in the northwest of Pakistan. Well, of course, this is good. But this is not the only possibility, as I think, I'm sorry that I missed Christina's presentation, but I think this is also at the roots of what Christina was doing. So to center the translation efforts on the community itself. So this means making available accurate information, so collect accurate information, have information double-checked by specialists. So have this pool of information, like Vic, I guess, was saying, and then empower the community by giving access to this accurate information, make sure that people understand the content of this accurate information, and then let them free to translate that content in their own language and adapting it to the various specific contexts in which the message should be delivered, and so where the audience lives. So it's highly context sensitive, and it has an increased effectiveness, especially in times of a pandemic, not only a pandemic, but also an infodemic like the one we are in now. So with the social media that are overpopulated by messages, mostly in the major languages of the world. So a member of a small community might be very surprised and also hit by seeing a message in his or her own language. But of course, this is a relatively slow process because it entails, so this empowerment entails also a knowledge transfer and also a training, because many people we've seen in the experience of other languages have kind of resistance in really believing they can be totally free in producing their messages. There is kind of the bias of the message-centered approach, so that there must be one message that is exactly the same across many languages, has really diffused and permeated the understanding of most of us. So this is what Endangered Languages does. We do community-centered translations of risk communication. So just to go quickly, so as I've said, but just to make sure this comes through clearly. So the message-centered approach is focused on the fact that the message is linguistically well-formed, and so that there is the maximized comprehension and of the message itself. Whereas the community-centered approach has the main goal is to have the message be linguistically and culturally appropriate, because it's not just comprehension but acceptance that matters. But of course the process is slower. Okay, we just said it. So a message should not just be understandable but perceived, so the source should be perceived as trustworthy. And it has been seen, and as I will just show you, that in communities in which access to information is limited, or in situations such as a pandemic/infodemic, it is highly likely that trust will be mostly localized, which means closer and better known sources are considered more trustworthy as opposed to more distant sources, however prestigious they are. And there is a very recent case that has been published in The Guardian. So there's been a survey carried out by the Wellcome Trust in the UK, and they found out that Black, Asian, and minority ethnic people were more likely to believe their employer's advice rather than anything Boris Johnson or the government said, and trusted the NHS, the National Health System and Public Health England less than white people did. So this is just to say that when we think of translating and doing this translation of risk communication in minority languages, this is not necessarily just a matter of reaching people living in marginal and peripheral areas of the world, which is in itself, of course, very important. But this is also a way to tell urban settlers, people who live in the modern world, wherever that may be, in Asia, in Europe, in the US, that it's very relevant to their own environments. It's not just a matter of rural, marginalized people. So how we do this? So we look for trustworthy speakers in these small communities, and this is most of the efforts go in here. Here we see traditional leaders, well-known people of certain communities. So there is a university professor, there are two traditional leaders, they are village chiefs, and then there is the lady is the head of a very powerful, say, traditional association in Oshie. These are all from Cameroon. And there are also other transporte speakers that are local VIPs. So these are singers and actors in Sotorwali, Waki, and Bafut. But trust is not just a matter of who speaks. Also, the way in which a person speaks can build trust in the message itself. This is something we have learned. We didn't really consider this beforehand. So even just opening the message by so using a traditional way of address can go quite far in building trust in the message. Also adopting meaningful ways to refer, for instance, to what one can do during a pandemic. And this is the second point. I was very surprised when I found this out, which is, so both in Bafut, which is spoken in Northwest Cameroon, and in Waki, that is spoken in Pakistan, so we're talking about two very different languages, the meaning of protect yourself from the virus simply doesn't exist. So it was not the way the speakers described the situation. So they didn't say, I'm now going to tell you how to protect yourself from the virus. But they both framed it as I will now tell you cunning ways to escape from the illness, which probably has, I mean, I don't know, we still have to do some, say, closer inspections, inquiries in this regard. But it would make a lot of sense, at least theoretically, in context where the language has not been written. So in an oral language context, this more active framing of the meaning of how to avoid being infected is very, I mean, I found it kind of illuminating in order to see how different a culturally appropriate translation could be. Because of course, in these languages, the verb protect does exist. The fact is that they didn't think it was very impactful in this message. So I'll now get to a few. If I have say 5-6 more minutes, I will change the. Okay, this is a video. Oh no, I didn't share. Just a second. Sorry. This is.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Just a second. This is very. Okay. Share audio. This is where we would. Okay, so Mandana was mentioning the infographics about so the cultural, say, limitation of infographics, and this is one of the best examples we have as to how distance can be translated across languages. This is in Mundabling. 2 meters. 1, 2. So the guy is saying, you've got it, I think. So it's a way to explain in very clear terms how much 2 meters are, how much distance they are. And then I would also like to have you listen to this. which is okay. So this is an article that I wrote in collaboration with other people, other members of our languages, for the Language on the Move blog, where I basically I give a little more details about what I'm talking about today. And here we have a nice example of how much creativity there can be in a culturally appropriate message. So listen to this. Okay, this is the introduction.
Come now. Now for pay una plenty sense. Do this thing then.
Okay.
It go save.
This is the introduction in Pidgin English. I hope you can hear this.
Hey! Hey! La un juteux! Un juteux! Eh ben, qu'est-ce que juteux? Tu veux te marrer?
So, and this goes on for a while. And basically, what the person is doing is to refer to this to this figure, to this role that is still quite effective and present in the social life of its community, that is in Babanki, but it's quite widespread across the Cameroonian grassfields. It's the figure of the town crier, the one that is given the power of distributing important news by the village chiefs. So you see here what so local appropriateness can mean in terms also of building trust. Just very quickly, because this is something also very important, just to close this presentation, is to tell you how we work. So we work with language teams. Why is that so? Because if we imagine, so we give total freedom to someone in speaking. So it's also possible that the person doesn't have a complete understanding of the messages that of the information that we make available. So one way to counter the possibility that we will be ending up producing and distributing messages that convey not accurate information is to involve more than one people in the production of these messages. So we stimulated the creation of language teams. So we give them access to accurate information that was created thanks to the collaboration with public health advisors, public health specialists at University of Buffalo. And then there are at least two people, native speakers of a local language. One will be the speaker, and at least one will be the judge, who is the one who will basically say validate the message and say, okay, that's good. It really respects and follows the main the accurate information that was provided, and then the contents are diffused in many ways. So far we have produced about 90 resources in 40 languages, 19 in Cameroon, 16 in Pakistan, 3 in Indonesia, and 2 in Ghana. And we'd be really glad to also have language teams from the Philippines. So if you want to do that, if you want to also, so if you want to see how to participate in the project, just go to viralanguages.org, and the website contains a lot of information. If you go to the contact, so if you go to the how it works, you will get to how to contact us, and also you can write an email to viralanguages@gmail.com. The partners are the project that I co-direct with Jeff Good, who's also a co-director of Vira Languages, that is the key pluridisciplinary advances on African multilingualism in Cameroon. Then there is the SOAS World Languages Institute, the University of Hawaii at Manoa, that is also the main responsible for the creation of the team in Indonesia, and also the Global Health Equity Group at the University of Buffalo. And here are our main volunteers, because all of us have been volunteering for this so far. Sidney Iyewaguseye Vasiliki Vita Leonor Lukshi. This is the Cameroon team: Achu Christophericom, Dokobai Dak, Margaret Chenemo, and Nelson Chongonghe. Indonesia team: Dotoyanti, Ika Nurayani, Giacomo Hakim, Kairunisa, and Bradley McDonald. And these are some of our collaborators and language team leaders. And these are our advisors. And I think I can stop here. Thanks for your patience.
Thank you so much for sharing what Viral Languages has been up to. So many the main point that I got from the presentation was the importance of contextualization and not just simply translating these materials, because what Mandana said a while ago, a lot of the materials being generated have the written bias. What makes us what in what position are we to assume that it's the most appropriate medium or way of um, conveying these messages, these important messages to the different communities, especially in the global south. So I wonder if Vic and Christina have anything to add or to ask Pier Paolo and Mandana regarding their project.
For me, I just really want to say my appreciation for you guys for presenting your work to the Filipino audience. It's nice to see how the Philippines compares to the wider context. And also, like, just hearing your presentation, it's just very theoretically grounded, like the details of the translation work, what are the specific considerations we need to think about, like what Vinci has already commented. Particularly about the dissemination and like getting the key members of the community to disseminate these information, because yeah, you have to ensure that the information is effectively disseminated into the community, and finding these key individuals actually is a good way to do that.
Yes.
Maybe I can contribute one thing here. It's really important that we don't think that there's anything wrong with infographics or with major language translation. We think that's fantastic because there is stuff that they're doing that reaches a lot of people, but because the linguist we work with, or Pier Paolo is he is working on the ground in Cameroon, we just know that it won't reach a lot of other people. So we want to contribute additionally and take our social and ethical responsibility up. So that's where we're coming from. So it's not about saying these people are doing something bad or wrong. Everyone is contributing, and we're contributing based on our experience as linguists, as field working linguists, and working in communities. So that's really where we're coming from. It's not about it's wrong to translate into another major language, or it's wrong to send out infographics. You can see that we just wanted to show that it is a problem for many, and I think the sign language case just drives the situation home as beautiful as, and it means the same thing for lots of other marginalized communities. Just to set the ground, it's not about that's wrong or bad. It's we just need more, and here we as linguists can contribute and give back.
Yes, and if I may add, just Vinci was mentioning the sort of contextualization as one keyword of this work, and this is not just that. It's true, definitely, and it's not just at the level of the message itself, but also the level of how it is disseminated. So, how can we think of having heavy videos being downloaded or played in places where people have low access to the internet? This is why we produce also audio messages. We post them in ways that, so we distribute them in ways that can be, easier to access, but also we receive, so we are also trying to deliver the audio messages through local radio stations. And we have received, but we still don't have funds for this. But we received a number of requests, especially from parts of Africa where also radios are not just very common, to donate loudspeakers to local groups so that they can play the messages in, say, marketplaces, or they can put loudspeakers on a car and then move and go around villages. So we are open to this, but we realize it would be beautiful if WHO did that. But on a global scale, that would mean, I don't know, really an impressive amount of work. So this is just to say, the more grassroots initiatives there are, the better.
Yeah. We have a question coming in. This is addressed to Pier Paolo. To expound on the Babanki initiative, did the community initiate? Was it a community ground up effort? Are the resources all from the community?
So we initiated. So we stimulated people to collaborate and participate in the Paralanguages project. We were not the only say entity though that started working at the level of translations. You know, the SIL, the Summer Institute of Linguistics. So there are Bible translators. So there are many groups that were already active. So in some communities, there were people who had been already kind of stimulated in doing translations. And I guess in Babanki, we have a number of different messages. One of them, which is the one that I played, might have been developed also across two projects, in our project and also in another project, so that the same person was part of two different projects. But I really have no idea. But anyway, we didn't collect resources produced by others. We stimulated the production, we supported the production, we gave access to the information, and then edited the files and then disseminated them in the channels that we had.
Yeah. So basically working with what is already there and who are already doing the work.
Yeah.
If there are any. If there aren't, we stimulate people through our connections. So there have been many cases in which a friend of a friend was a speaker of an endangered language. So we reached that friend of a friend and told them, look, why don't you do this? And they didn't even think of that beforehand. They just started working on a message because of we asking them to do this.
Yes.
One other comment I want. Go, Mandana.
Go ahead, Christina. Go.
No, just another comment about the good, like one of the good things about these grassroots efforts is that they're really grounded in the community and that they know the community very well in order to really communicate these information effectively. So yes, the role of these grassroots initiatives is really important in this pandemic.
Yes. And the way to think about it, what Pier Paolo developed is basically a workflow that addresses. It needs to be in the right language. It needs to be by the right speaker, in the right context, through the right medium. That's all. But then, and then it's the community and the inside people that fill it, right? And we try to make sure that when it's translated, that playing it back to someone else from the community, that the translation is fine, right? That the message comes across. So there's a little quality check in there, but it's just a workflow in the principle. It's a workflow that ensures that the message is addressing these 4 or 5 important things, because as Pier Paolo showed, we are still surprised about things that we discover, like cunning ways of escaping instead of protecting, for me, it was this whole 2 meters distance. I lived in the US and people would talk about feet and yard, and I just didn't understand what that means. I have no concept of it because I'm meter based, right?
Yeah.
And then it's like if I throw a meter at someone who doesn't work in these distances, that beautiful 2-step. So that's the community solution to it. It's not that we told them, oh, translate it like this or do this. That's what they come up with. So that's why. So if there's grassroots happening already, that's fantastic. If it's not, here is a way of doing it and initiating it, and then take it and do more with it. That's basically the stance we're taking here. We're just trying to use our knowledge for the good of the people, but not impose anything on anybody.
Yeah, and just a little addition. By thinking that there is one right way to say things in a minority language, in an endangered language, I think we run into a risk that we think there is no variety, there is no diversity within the community and within that language. However small, a community will always have some internal micro-political micro conflicts. There will always be varieties that are kind of in antagonism. So I myself would never say, okay, we're doing exactly just the right thing. There's no other way to do this. There's no other way to put this message. The goal, my personal goal as a linguist anthropologist, is to stimulate the creation of messages, hoping that someone in the community will start a debate on the message. Because if we produce one message, 2 messages, 3 messages, they will be listened to, watched in, say, 4 weeks, 2 months, but no longer than that. Even so, the goal is to establish a continuing conversation. So the final goal would be that is where we can make sure that risk communication is really impactful. If people are not talking about this, they will soon, I mean, as everyone, it's not just the minority language speakers, everyone just forget or will be overwhelmed with other sources, other messages. So the goal is to foster discussion, conversations. And conversations are often stimulated by, say, quote-unquote conflicts. So I was very happy when someone criticized a message that was produced in Bafut and proposed to make a new one. I said, yes, please, do another message.
Yeah. Vic, I wonder if you have experiences of similar nature in Magbikol Kita's efforts, where there are multiple messages. Yeah.
Yes, actually, I'm just listening to everyone because of the 5 of us here. I'm the one not coming from linguistics background. My background is communication, and I'm actually playing that on that plane, and I'm learning a lot because I'm also with the Department of Education in contextualizing textbook materials for the regions, and perhaps I think I will bring something to the group as far as contextualization is concerned, because we are so contained and limited within the idea of contextualization that's too physical, that's too visual. But I think we have to go deeper into ethnographic and then a little more into that, especially that the Philippines is not just diverse in terms of language, but these languages are very much defined by, topography, by the cultures, the variety of cultures that we have. And funny that Magbikol Kita, in its translation efforts during the pandemic, I think we're doing a bit of everything of this that we're talking about, but we just didn't know. we just didn't know because diba? We're doing that, and I think this calls also for us to learn more and study more and do a little of digging, for us to be, I think, because what we're doing practically is getting materials from elsewhere and translating the language. But yes, I failed to look into the visual aspect of the things that we're disseminating. We it is also interesting, I think, that in the age when in a time when we are limited from, we're not allowed to go out, we're not allowed to, we don't have time to go out, it's just not allowed. We're so limited to materials available on the internet. Say, for example, the vector graphics available on the free vector graphics available for us to use in infographics. Yes, I think we need to do more on this aspect. Uh, and I'm learning a lot. No? Thanks to you, Mandana and Pier Paolo, because these are things that are new to me now. And
I'm so
another
sorry I was
new
not here.
learning.
I'm so sorry I was not here. I'm just regretting that. I would have learned really a lot from both of you too.
Yeah, absolutely. It was amazing for me to hear the Biko efforts, and I thought it was so interesting to learn how you did this from the inside. The for us, the thing is, like, we working with communities that have no internet access, that have no are not literate, or they're literate in one language but not in the language that they speak mostly or they trust mostly. So we were working with the people that where the infographics, understanding infographics means, you have been trained in this, right? You understand the abstraction that is behind it, and the idea that there's anything universal is just, it's just bizarre to us, because
Yes.
there is just nothing universal, and we need to take this into account. And that's why, the grassroots efforts are amazing, but then we have communities where there's not much happening. So here we can maybe help and give a framework within which communities can develop something, and the communication starts, and then they take it on, and where no one needs us anymore at all, right? So that's, and we have seen, for example, that looking at paper or reading and writing is not the medium, but it's radio, community radio in many places in Africa, or also in South America. Community radio every Tuesday of the week from 6 to 8 in the Amazon in Ecuador, somewhere there is a radio, and everyone tunes in because it's in their language, right? And as you all know, and we know this from our own experience, from our children, from our students, the way to think about it sometimes is also to think there's different learners. Some learners are visual, some are auditory, some are haptic, right? Taking in information, understanding information, accepting information works differently for different people. And in communities, sometimes someone once asked me, who is the community? Who makes decision in the community? And it's like, well, that's a very good question. In a lot of places, it's not homogeneous, right? So
Exactly.
again, here, if I'm talking to my 14-year-old son, he gets messages very differently from a different generation. And beside all the politics, right, already that will tell us, diversity needs to happen on every level of our work,
Right. Maybe we can have one final question coming in from those tuning in. This is from Aldrin Lee, addressed to Mandana. Do you also intend to turn your project into policy recommendations for nation states or governments? Is there an
So
ongoing initiative?
yes, there is. Interestingly, UNESCO is developing an atlas for languages. So they had an atlas for endangered languages in danger, and it was about to be shut down, and then anyway. So there is an initiative to create an atlas of all languages of the world, which I think is excellent, because it's not only about, it's important to understand what language means. It's a human right issue, and it's a linguistic right issue, because the pandemic has shown us beautifully, I mean, sadly, what it means not to get information to people. As you know, I mean, Christina really said it very heavily, it's murder. It's, so the pandemic has shown us how important it is to have multilingual things. And of course, we need to be realistic of what can be achieved. But in UNESCO, there is in preparation a word report on languages, and there's more work coming out that then can be translated into policy and recommendations for governments. So as you know, we had we had the Year of Indigenous Languages, which was started through an initiative of South American, Latin American countries. And now we will have the Decade of Indigenous Languages. That's from 2022 to 2032. So this is going to be our time. So Vic, Biko, you have work to do to bring it up.
Yes, definitely.
Hopefully, your work or the Warriors' work or our work, we can really push in the right direction on every level that we can push. And we will be pushing on the UNESCO side to, get this on paper, get this working. And as you all know, policy, government recommendation, that all takes a long time, but that's what we're going to be doing, right? So it's important to us to make sure that language is not a cultural folkloristic thing for the museum, but it's a human rights issue, and it's access to resources and access to services that governments have to provide. And that starts with recognizing them, with documenting them, with having them in the census as surveys, and.
Yeah. Yes, and I'd like to mention that I think that's one of the next steps for Language Warriors PH and even the UP Department of Linguistics for these things to be really concretized into policy recommendations for the national government. So high hopes for that, and yes, more work to do for all of us. Thank you so much to all our presenters and our panel members. Really, so many insights and so many learnings. At this point, I'd like to call on our chairperson, the chairperson of the UP Department of Linguistics, Jem Javier, just to close our afternoon session and also to close the 98th year celebration of our department.
Okay. Magandang hapon po sa lahat. On behalf of the Department of Linguistics, I would like to thank all the insightful speakers for this afternoon's event, Mr. Victor Dennis Nierva, Professor Maria Christina Gallego, Dr. Mandaya Seyfedinipur, and Dr. Pier Paolo Di Carlo. We are aware of the limitations that time difference might pose, but you still accepted our invitation and graciously shared with us your knowledge on and experience from your linguistic advocacies with us. We could have been enjoying good food after an event, but because of COVID-19, we still hope that in time we may meet each other face to face after this public health crisis. Appreciation also to Professor Vincent Christopher Santiago for moderating the online forum. And thank you to all the viewers from all over who are tuning in and will watch later this important online forum. Special thanks to the Department of Linguistics, especially to all the people who are behind this event and have been spearheading the month-long celebration, to Professors Vinci Santiago, Divine Angeli Enriga, and Noah Cruz, to Ms. Jureka Chin Abrigo, our research associate, and Professor Elsie Marie Or, our overall director and broadcast manager. This culminating activity of this year's Linguistics Month has proved that issues pertaining to language is not and will never be irrelevant. The Department of Linguistics at UP has been around for 98 years already. Having said that, we realize how much work still has to be done to promote not just the appreciation of the linguistic diversity in the country, but also actively fighting for the right of all to information, no matter what language they speak. We hope that these will also spark initiatives and new efforts to use language towards empowering communities and crafting inclusivist decisions and policies on a national level. Maraming salamat po at magandang hapon sa ating lahat.
Thank you very much for this invitation and
Thank
for this
you.
Yes.
opportunity.
Thank
I
you.
really
Thanks for
appreciate
inviting.
it.
Thank you po.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.